I want to welcome everybody to Psalm 143. I say 143 because going forward, it does feel a bit like climbing a mountain, with 150 being the summit. And as one sees the summit, one is energized. And I'm energized. I will add, because I'm working also on Psalm 144 for tomorrow, that some say 144 is actually the end of the Psalms. You'll see why some scholars say that. And that 145 and 150, the Hallelujah Psalms, are a block that might have been added later, which is just to say with 143 today, 144, it's as if we're reaching at least a significant plateau toward the top. And 143 and 144, as I noted yesterday, are a pair of psalms. There is a phrase that we focused our attention on yesterday, V'tit atef alai ruchi, and wrapped up in me is my spirit. That phrase that occurred in the fourth verse of 142 is in the fourth verse also of 143. So there's this kind of echo of an unusual line. And not unlike yesterday, Psalm 142, this psalm is divided into two sections with a lot of phrases that seem to echo other phrases in Scripture, and that 142 and 143 have a collage feel to them. At the same time, the focus of Psalm 142 is a little different than 143. 142 yesterday, there's that sense of the psalmist calling out repeatedly. That's the key verbs. He's constantly calling out to God with synonyms of calling, crying, wailing, because he's feeling endangered and calling for God to save him. Well, Psalm 143 is another facet of that quality of endangerment. The quality of Psalm 143 is, I need your help, God, even though I am fallible, I am human, I am therefore not like you. And the key word is tzaddik, righteous or just. God and only God is fully Hatzadik, the righteous, and that all humans, echoing Job and other parts of Scripture that I'll point to, are incomplete. So I ask for your mercy, God, not because of my merit. That's the key theme of Psalm 143. I need your help. I call on you because I know that you are kind. And so with that, let's look at Psalm 143, which I choose for its title a phrase, teach me to do your will, because the other aspect of Psalm 143 is, although I am incomplete, I'm not fully righteous, at the same time, God, I am loyal to you. Seek to do your will. A Psalm of David. Adonai shmat filati. Hear my prayer. Give ear to my plea for grace. In your faithfulness, answer me with your righteousness. And do not come into judgment with your servant at avadecha. For none that is alive is justified before you. Ki lo yitzdak lefanecha chochai. For an enemy has pursued my soul. Crushed to the ground is my life, causing me to dwell in deep darkness as the dead eternally. And enwrapped upon me is my spirit. Within me desolate is my heart. I recalled the days of old. I meditated on all your work. On the doings of your hands I contemplate. I have spread out my hands to you. My soul as a land is weary, is thirsty for you. Selah. Hurry, answer me, Adonai. Failing is my spirit. Do not hide your face from me, lest I become like those who descend into the pit. Cause me to hear in the morning your loving kindness, for in you do I trust. Cause me to know the way wherein I should walk. For to you I have raised my soul. Rescue me from my enemies, Adonai. With you I am covered. Teach me to do your will, for you are my God. May your good spirit lead me in an upright land. For the sake of your name, Adonai, enliven me with your righteousness. Bring out from straits my soul, and in your loving kindness, cut off my enemies and destroy all troublers of my soul. Ki ani avdecha, for I am your servant. And so the emphasis in Psalm 143 is Ki ani avdecha, I am your servant. I may be incomplete, which is the nature of the human condition. But I seek to have you guide me in your ways. I seek to be righteous the way you are righteous, and it is your righteousness that I rely on to be the source of compassion for me. That's Psalm 143. And so this key motif is that of righteousness. So it's in verse 1. In your faithfulness, be'emunatcha, aneni, answer me, bitzkatecha, with your righteousness. And that is also in verse 11. For the sake of your name, Adonai, enliven me, bitzidkatcha, with your righteousness, v'chastecha, now verse 12, and in your loving kindness, cut off my enemies. Ki ani avdecha, for I am your servant. So the envelope of this psalm is these two ideas of your righteousness and your servant. The closing word of this psalm is also already in verse 2. V'al tavo mishpat et avdecha, do not come into judgment with your servant. And now you get a poetic device throughout this psalm that I really find I'm drawn to. And that is the same word will be used in a little bit different conjugation to contrast God and a person. So here, bitzidkatecha, verse 1, the last word, in your righteousness. Verse 2, for none that is alive is yitzdak lefanecha, is righteous before you, or is justified before you. Meaning, in contrast to God, God's tzedek, no person can be so equated. You get a similar wordplay that, again, is part of the artistry. Verse 5, the word will be hands. Ma'aseh yadecha asocheach, and the doing of your hands I contemplate, your handiwork, that world that you have fashioned, on that I meditate. And then in verse 6, parasti yadai elecha, I have spread out my hands to you. Now, spreading out one's hands to God is the gesture of prayerfulness, which we have in other psalms, Psalm 63:2, Psalm 77, 12 and 13. So the image here is God's hands are the creating hands. Our hands are the supplicating hands. And so righteousness of God is not our righteousness. The power of God's hands is quite dissimilar to the lack of power in our hands. The first part, again, ends with the word Selah. I want to focus today on an interesting theme, and that's in verse 2. Namely, this phrase, Ki lo yitzdak lefanecha kol chai, for none that is alive, and I'm going to change justified, is just before you, because is righteous before you. Because I want to show that it's the same word that is used here. So there you go, righteous. I'll figure out later how to spell righteous. E-O. Okay, I'll figure this out later, how to spell. There we go. I can spell. Is righteous before you. So this idea, ki lo yitzdak lefanecha kol chai, and the word kol chai is all that is alive. And the commentators will debate if kol chai is simply relating to humans, all mortal. That's the way the King James Version will understand it. Here's the King James translation. For in thy sight shall no man living be justified. And so in King James, it's a statement about the human condition. In Robert Alter and Benjamin Siegel will emphasize that the Hebrew kol chai is broader than that. It's to say anything that God created, any living thing, is but a creature, is subservient to God, is incomplete, not just a human in terms of the reference. And it can be either way. You do get it in Job, both chapter 4, verse 17, Ha'enosh melohai yitzdak, can a human before God be righteous, be justified? Or Job 15:14. Ma enosh, what is a human? Ki yitzdak, ki yizkeh, that for being worthy, v'chi yitzdak, that he would be justified or righteous, yelud isha, who is born to a woman. So both there in Job, you have the same sentiment, but there specifically, instead of kol chai, it's the word enosh, a human that cannot be justified before God. You get a similar idea in 1 Kings 8:46. Ki ein adam asher lo yechata, for there is no mortal which does not sin. And you'll get the same kind of idea, Psalm 53:4 or Psalm 14:3. Ein oseh tov, there is none who does good. Ein gam echad, not even one. That idea of the fallibility, the incompleteness, the sinfulness of human condition and creatureliness is something that will be picked up in the New Testament by Paul in particular in the third chapter of Romans, where it will say that no one is righteous, not even one. And then in 3:20, law just shows how sinful we are. So what I want to do is a little sidebar in terms of King James and Paul, and a little bit about Christianity and Judaism on this topic of sinfulness. The first thing I want to acknowledge is how much translations influence interpretations later on. The very first translation of the Bible into a foreign language is probably the Septuagint. In the Talmud, Megillah 9a, there's this description of 6 elders from each tribe, 72 elders, who are each sequestered to translate the Bible, apparently in the 3rd century before the Common Era, 3rd or 4th. And a miracle occurs in that they each have the exact same translation. And that will be later called the Septuagint. And we don't know when this Greek translation or how it really came into being. That's the tall tale from the Talmud. We do know that already in Alexandria, Egypt, and now I look to my friend Aaron Harari, who is born in Egypt, raised there. In Alexandria, Egypt, which is a major Jewish community of the 1st, 2nd century before the Common Era, the great philosopher Philo, 1st century, will be using a Greek translation. So Philo's commentary will be largely based on a Greek translation, which will later be identified as, quote, Septuagint. Going forward in time, in 382, Pope Damasus commissions the Latin translation of the Bible. That will be translated by Saint Jerome, who's considered the Bible scholar in Christendom at the time, and that will become known as the Vulgate. And the Vulgate will be used by the Catholic Church, and it will be only in 1546 at the Council of Trent when the Catholic Church will make the Vulgate, which will have been revised, the official Bible of the Catholic Church. About that same time, namely the 16th century, it's actually a little after that, that King James in England will convene in 1604 a council with the orders to translate the Bible into English. And these scholars, he's also going to use 6 panels. And I say also because, again, the legend of the Septuagint is 6 representatives of 12 tribes. He has 6 panels, which is 47 Bible scholars in all, who will in 1611 produce the first edition of the King James Version of the Bible, which will take about 100 years to supplant for English speakers the Latin Vulgate. And that will be revised about 150 years later by Benjamin Blaney of Oxford, which will create the standard King James Version, which will come out in 1769. And I do a little bit of that history of these translations of Bible, because I'll be quoting here a few times the King James Version. Robert Alter, in the presentation he did with the Orange County Community Scholar Program, which is occsp.net, talked about how the King James Version, more than any of the other translations by Jewish scholars, had a sensibility of the poetic, shorter, rhythmic, using images. For him, it was his guide to trying to create a contemporary translation that was both aware of the Hebrew but had more of a poetic ear to it. So King James Version, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want," is how many of us hear much of our Psalms and much of our Bible. Well, back to this verse. "For none that is alive is righteous before you," again the King James Version, "for in thy sight shall no man living be justified," will be a key image that will separate Christianity and Judaism. For Judaism, that's a statement of humility. And God is accepting, anticipating the fallibility of creatureliness. But for Paul, this motif will be why there is a need for a Savior of grace. For, as I quoted before in Romans, law just shows how sinful we are. There's a very important book in my own understanding of Judaism and Christianity that was written in the 70s, 1977, by a professor of, he may have been then or just after at the Duke Seminary. He's a Christian scholar. His name is E.P. Sanders. And the book that I spent the summer studying many years ago is called Paul and Palestinian Jewry, a comparison of patterns of religion, published by Indiana Press. It was a bit of a academic slog and very valuable to me. And what E.P. Sanders sought to show in this book is that Paul misrepresented Judaism. And he wanted to present this to other Christian scholars. And here's what he said. He said, Paul presented Judaism as a long list of laws that would determine a passing score, whether you got to heaven or not. But you were never aware of how well you were doing on the test. And so always lived with anxiety. This is how Paul presented Judaism. Laws that you could never fully fulfill, and therefore never knew if you were going to have a place in the world to come, if you had a passing grade. And that needed to be remedied. And it was remedied, according to Paul, who E.P. Sanders would emphasize as the key shaper of Christianity. It would be remedied by grace, by an offering, Jesus, to enable a person who had the sin offering of Jesus a ticket to heaven. And he would say, for Christianity, the goal of religion was salvation, finding a place in heaven. But for the rabbis of the early centuries of the Mishnah, the goal was living in relationship with God and not the afterlife. There was a belief in the afterlife, but the goal of religion and the goal of law was to fulfill expectations of relationship. And so I'll pause with that just to acknowledge this is an opportunity to talk about the sibling relationship of Christian understanding and Jewish understanding. But this phrase, Ki lo yitzdak lefanecha kol chai, for none that is alive is righteous before you, would have a very different valence in Paulian Christianity than in rabbinic Judaism. And now this idea of being God's servant, teach me to do your will, I am your servant, and linking it to judgment, va'al tavo v'mishpat, do not come into judgment, et avadecha, of your servant, and concluding with, I am your servant. But being God's servant here is linked to knowing and following God's ways. Hurry, answer me, falling is my spirit. Again, verse 7, echoing Psalm 142. Cause me to hear in the morning your loving kindness. For in you do I trust. Cause me to know the way wherein I should walk. For to you I have raised my soul. The image here of verse 8 is one of potential power. Power, the ability to affect change. If you show me the way, God, I will follow the way. I am loyal to you. I know that I am your servant, that it is only you who are righteous. And yet you, I do trust, can show me the way. And so this notion of give me guidance, namely give me law, give me your teachings. In verse 8, cause me to hear in the morning. This phrase can be understood in a variety of ways. Cause me to hear when my troubles end. Cause me to hear each morning when I arise, so that each day I can start with the awareness of how to live my life. Or it can be just, after the darkness that I'm experiencing, metaphorically, let me see the way. There is a phrase of that a ship, any wind where a ship does not know its port of destination is a disturbing wind, which is to say, only where I know where I want to go is the wind in my sails able to lead me. And so here the image is that God's Spirit, which is here in verse 10, Rucha Tova, a good spirit, a good wind, can lead me into an upright land. King James Version will translate this as level ground. And that's some Jewish commentators will as well, which is a ground where I don't have obstacles. But it can also be lead me to Eretz Mishor, to an upright land. Mishor, a synonym for tzaddik, for the righteous. Your teachings, verse 10, teach me to do your will, for you are my God. The idea that I am teachable and therefore look to learn from you, the righteous one, how to live my life, which for the closing lines, verses 11 and 12, for the sake of your name, Adonai, enliven me, or give me life, revive me with your righteousness. Your righteousness, God, is what will enliven me. Your way will give me the light and the path to bring me out from the straits of my soul, mitzara nafshi, from the trouble of my spirit. All those are possible translations, which is also to say, to pull all this together, we don't know here if the enemy is internal, external, or both. What is clear is this psalmist is troubled within and not only from without, looking for God's light, God's guidance, God's way to be a righteous person. And that righteousness is linked to loving kindness, to chesed. And in your loving kindness, cut off my enemies and destroy all my troublers of my soul. Ki ani avdecha, for I am your servant. There are three possible understandings of the closing. One, God, do kindness to me because it's good for your reputation. Verse 11, for the sake of your name, Laman Shimcha. 2, may it be your act of chesed. Verse 12, your act of kindness. Or 3, may it be an act of loyalty rewarded. For I am your servant. I seek your way. Therefore, bring me out of tsara nafshi, of the straits of my soul struggles. And so to pull together 142, focused on hear my voice. Psalm 143 is let me hear your voice. Guide me, teach me. I am your servant. Redeem me from that which troubles me, both from without and from within. And with that, I look to gain some of your reactions to this coupling of Psalm 142 and 143. I will add, as I said at the outset, Psalm 144 will actually end in kind of a idyllic description of a world at peace. That's part of the trajectory. Yesterday with Rabbi Steinberg as our honoree, he said, I hope it ends well. So tomorrow, Psalm 144, it ends idyllic. Young men and young women shapely like the corner pillars of a palace, and young men growing strong. It's all this idyllic closing. We'll get to that tomorrow, but you can see 142, 143 are this kind of churning, this sense of tsuris, of trouble, and are complementary of listen, 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 guide, I will listen to you, guide me. Reactions or thoughts? Okay, Marion, so nice to see your hand up.
When you were going over verse 8, I was thinking that each day when we wake up, it's another opportunity to make it a better day. To follow all of this and to it just caused me to hear in the morning, I've woken up, I got through the night, I got through the darkness of the night. Here I am, I have a new day to be good again.
So I'm going to just pull it up again, and then I'm going to go to Deidre. So Deidre, I'm giving you a moment to catch your breath. And that is also to point out that I said this is a psalm in two halves. In verse 6, you see the word Selah. Remember the image that's like a drum beat ending a section, and then pointing to Marion's focus, and that is the beginning of verse 8. Cause me to hear in the morning, hashmi eni vaboker chasdecha, your kindness. And what you evoke first, Marion, is that the word your kindness is the envelope of the second half. That word will appear twice here in verse 8, and it'll reappear at the beginning of verse 12, in your kindness. And so here is the awakening to God's kindness, loving kindness. For in you do I trust. And as you acknowledge, Marion, there is the darkness of the night, of the soul, the soul's darkness of night. And there's the sense of hopefulness, of morning, the rising of sun, new beginnings, a new day can be the experience renewed of awareness of God's kindness. And with that hopefulness, looking forward as if it is a beginning of a new day. Deidre, you had a couple comments, and I often don't look into the chats as I'm looking at you. So go ahead, Deidre. Please share.
Well, I was thinking about Isaiah 61 when it says, the garment of praise for the spirit of heaviness. And that reminds me of yesterday's psalm when it talks about your spirit being wrapped around you. A lot of the imagery there was being heavy or smothered by your situation, and it does feel heavy, and I love that there's a comfort there where you can have that heaviness lifted and feel like your spirit is being, enlivened, and it's not a burden.
So I just opened up to Isaiah 61, where there's, as Deidre points us, this image of being enwrapped by God. There it's, bind up the wounded of heart, and it will conclude, it will move forward to, in verse 10, wrapped me in a robe of victory, like a bridegroom adorned with a turban, like a bride bedecked with her finery. So there too, there is the image used of clothing as metaphor for potentially, in this case, or yesterday more so, and here too, there's the Hita tefalai ruchi, verse 4, wrapped up is my spirit. And that can be understood either negatively, which is how most understand it, which is my kind of wrapped up in myself. But the image of wrapped can also be, and you'll see it tomorrow. That also foreshadows tomorrow's psalm. And yesterday we had the end, let me be crowned or encircled as a model for others. Another comment, Deidre?
Probably, but it's not coming to me at the moment.
All right, that's fine. All right, thank you. Go ahead, Alex, and then Shula after Alex, and then I'll pull it together. You have to unmute Alex.
Couple things. First, in verse 3. I'm sorry. In verse 2, the last. Because one of the problems of translating it is they make a verb out of tzedakah. Because no life, righteouses or justices.
Yeah, so I'm looking here at all my different translations for this phrase lo yitzdak, often translated as justified. I'm looking to see if I have another. Here's Art Scroll. No creature would be innocent before you. So the word yitzdak would be like tzedek, tzedek tirdof, righteousness, righteousness, or justice, justice you shall pursue. So the image is nobody would prove fully vindicated. Nobody would prove fully just compared to you is the key motif. But again, I emphasize that that's a reoccurring theme in the Bible. You get it elsewhere in Psalms, Kings, Job, Isaiah. And for the rabbis, it's a statement of humility. My friend and teacher, Rabbi Larry Kushner, says that the first of the 10 commandments can be understood as, I am God, you are not.
Yeah.
So, that notion is remember that you are less than God is the other way to understand, ki lo yitzdak lefanecha kol chai. No one is like you. And the word tzedek means fully righteous. Right. We're all incomplete. That, by the way, is part of, I was looking, we have it, I think, is part, I was going to say, but I may be wrong. Maybe my friend Rabbi Jack will help me with the beginning of our Yisker service. In any event, I pause to turn to Cantor Shula and then Vivian, and then we'll pull it together. Go ahead, Shula.
I just wanted to react a little bit to style and choice of words. Those are always the things that seem to interest me because style and words are always choices. So I always marvel at the poet. And, initially when I looked at verse 7, I said to myself, boy, there's almost chutzpah here, because first you tell him, I'm your servant. And then you say, come on, hurry. My soul is dying for you. So you're telling God, do it fast or else. But then I realized that starting with verse 5, really what's going on, there is a sense of, a style of really a lover's devotion type words. Zacharti yamim mikedem brings to me, Zacharti la chesed ne'uraich. Maher aneni kaltarochi, and then altaster. These are all terms that you can find in the Song of Songs. The lover rushing, my soul is dying for you. You are hiding from me. And then elecha nasati nafshi, my soul is rising to you. So I was just reacting during this section to the fact that the style here, rather than be God the majestic, is how much this writer, this poet, has love for God and using love language.
I love that, Shula, and your ear to link it. And I shared yesterday that the repetition of words and images from elsewhere in Psalms is both potentially an artistic device to say, who am I? I lack words, so I draw words from elsewhere to express what I need to say. But specifically in this case, the words that are chosen that echo for you and now for us, Shula, are words of love song, Song of Songs. And again, our psalmist is eliciting in his audience that sense of God as lover by the words that are chosen. I've been preparing Psalm 144. That's where I just got confused a moment ago, which has a similar idea. Adonai ma adam v'teidaehu ben anosh v'techashvehu, which is, Adonai, what is a human that you know us, a human being that you consider us, which is another way of framing our creatureliness compared to you. And that is the beginning of Yisker, and that's taken from the beginning of Psalm 144, which we'll look at tomorrow. So again, here, a statement of both humility and, as you point out, Shula, at the same time, a sense of a lover's relationship. Last comment is Vivian, and then I'll pull it together. You got to unmute, Vivian.
I love that last comment, let me just say. I'm going to ask you, as our translator, to say a little bit more about the word cause, which is repeated. To me, because I think in terms of philosophically of God as first cause, creator of the world in our tradition and in that philosophy, it's almost to me as if the invocation to cause this creation is mirroring the creation of the world again for me, the psalmist. And so can you tell us more about what the word cause means in these contexts?
So thank you for the question. And Vivian, as many of us know, is a translator of books into French, from French to English, Vivian?
From French to English, yes.
Primarily. So I'm always honored to have you, a professional translator, professor in our midst, and a sensitivity to the choices. I just will pull up what Vivian was referring to. I chose to translate the word hashmi'eni as cause me to hear, and likewise hodi'eni, cause me to know, in that there's a quality in grammar here, in the imperfect, reflexive, that it can be understood as cause me. And I chose that because it is a possibility, I see it in some other translations, to suggest I depend on you, God, to give me the capacity to hear your loving kindness. Others will translate it as the jussive, let me hear in the morning, or may I hear in the morning, which is more prayerful. So it can be translated in this more prayerful mode, or it can be translated, there's a prayer dimension, but it's one of a greater sense that of dependency. So I chose cause me, which again is part of the grammar of Hashmi Aini, cause me to hear, to suggest the humility, and like you shared, Vivian, that God as creator is the enabler of our capacities. And so that's why I chose cause me and cause me in this case, is to underscore that quality of dependency and humility embodied in the key theme here of, for I am your servant, namely, all depends on you, on your orders. The image of being a servant means it is you who choose for me what I need to do. And I am here knowing my role, which is to enhance you, to praise you, to express my gratitude for you. With that, Psalm 143, I thank you all. Tomorrow, Psalm 144, in many ways concluding this segment. This is a Psalm of David. We don't know its exact context. I will add, as we focused in on some of the Christian and Jewish relationship, that Augustine of Aleppo, 3rd century, in the 4th century, will say this was written by David in response to his son Absalom threatening his kingship. But we don't know the exact moment, but I am reminded and I embrace how Psalms are texts that Christians and Jews have echoed. And in the Messianic notion, Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel said, in reference to Christian-Jewish dialogue, and Joshua Heschel was involved with Vatican II. It was he in particular who said to Pope John the 23rd, the church has to stop seeking to convert Jews. And it was with Vatican II that was changed. It was Rabbi Heschel who said, when the Messiah comes, may he not proclaim his name, so that both Christians and Jews can say together, yes, this is the Messiah we have awaited. Since Christians and Jews have understood, the anticipation differently. At the same time, even the concept of Messiah is unique to the Bible and is a product of our sharing text. And so may we share the text and do so with reverence for the text and respect for each other. With that,
Rabbi.
Yeah. Oh, Aaron, I got so involved. My privilege. Our honoree, Aaron Harari, you make me so happy to have you in our midst. A word from you. Thank you, Aaron. I got too involved in the teaching.
That's all right.
Go ahead and react.
I just wanted to say, when you talk about Christians and Jews, I went to Collage de la Salle in Alexandria, and it's a Christian school, and all our education was done in French. And believe it or not, half of the school, they were Christian and half of it was Jewish. And they used to have a rabbi that he used to come in and say the prayer for Shabbat and all kind of stuff like that. It was just amazing. You know what I mean? And then after that, I went to France and I lived, in Paris and itself. And then after that, I went to Villiers-le-Bel et Garges-les-Gonesse. It's a suburb, so it was just kind of funny what you were saying about Christians and Jews. It just all of a sudden it came to my mind. I said, "Oh my God, College de la Salle." You know what?
I just love that, Aaron, and also I love the fact that I could make reference here to the origin of the Septuagint, the Greek translation, and to place it in terms of first getting popularized in Egypt in the 1st century. And having you in our midst, Aaron, is a reminder of how Jews continue to live in Egypt throughout the generations. And we are harvesting, whether in America or in Israel, this quality of the ingathering of strands of learning and teaching. And in your case, Aaron, having gone to a Christian school in Alexandria, Egypt, is again a reminder, and a beautiful reminder, of the relationship between Christians and Jews in reading our Psalms.
And
in
here's
reading
another
our sacred text.
My grandmother, she was born in Corfu, Greece, and they immigrated to Alexandria. When we lived in Alexandria, basically there's only three categories: was the Jews, the Armenians, and the Greeks. And basically that's who lived in Alexandria. Very little, in Cairo was totally different population. You know what I mean? So all our friends that were Greek and Armenians, so it was just kind of funny. And my grandfather, he was from Palermo, from Italy, and they went to Syria. Then from Syria they came to Alexandria. So, at home that's all we spoke: French, Italian, and Greek.
That is wonderful. And I will add, Aaron, that your own creativity in the world of computers and computer security and your patents, your own creativity and being an early adapter to technology is no doubt linked to this sense of harvesting languages and worlds that are your foundation. Yes. So, Aaron, it's an honor to honor you this morning. It's each time an honor to have you in our midst.